Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 335 for Monday, February 3rd, 2025. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all major podcast platforms, including here on YouTube if you're watching the video version. If you're enjoying the show, consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this. My name is Jonny, but the internet knows me as Pixelriffs, and joining me as always is Keeper of the Core, Joel Duggan. Hi, Joel.
I am Keeper of the Core, and if you want to hear more about Core Keeper coming up in the post-show, then you might want to check out the render distance. It's the extended version of the program. It's available at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. It's where our supporters get an extra 20 to 30 minutes of content every single week, along with other bonus episodes that we record. Earlier in the render distance, we were talking about Johnny's RPG tabletop experience over the weekend with Mork Borg and Starfinder, and Stillfleet was another one. There's all kinds of tabletop systems that Johnny's messing around with. And if that's something that you are interested in, then consider checking out the render distance. While you're at the Patreon page and member of our community, you also get access to things like the monthly Minecraft Hangout, which was recorded this past February 1st on Saturday. That is going to be going out probably before you even hear this show. It'll go out to our patrons on the Patreon page. And that's where Johnny and I hang out with our patrons and talk about what they've been doing in Minecraft. Some really cool builds, talk about different techniques. There's been almost 2 months since the Pale Garden came out. So then a lot of people were building with Pale Oak and Hanging Moss and things like that. So it was really, really cool to see. We also have a quarterly hangout coming up on Saturday, February 15th. That is going to be where Johnny and I go over the download numbers, the Patreon progress, all that kind of stuff, the business behind the scenes of the podcast. And speaking of Patreon, there are changes happening next week. As far as everything we know, and as far as things going according to plan, we'll be switching from a per episode subscription basis to a monthly subscription basis on Patreon. Those are changes that Patreon is making. We are following suit. And so any details of those changes will be outlined in our Discord. So if you are a patron, you will 100% be kept in the loop ahead of time. And if you are thinking of becoming a patron, thank you very much. And again, you use the email if you want, spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. If you have any questions about the changes coming to Patreon, either directly in the Discord if you're already there, or email us if you are thinking about becoming a patron but you're not sure. Happy to answer all the questions.
Yes, Joel has been taking the lead on liaising with Patreon about some of these changes, so I can't thank you enough, Joel. You've been a busy one, but you've also been busy in Minecraft, from what I understand, so talk us through what's new on the Citadel.
I am on to a new project on the Citadel, not outside of Westhill. I'm on to another part of Westhill, as one might imagine. There's still a large checklist of things that need to get done, and one of which is something we've talked about recently on the show, and that's rebuilding a farm that I have. It's actually an old potato farm. It is the first build in the area in Westhill. It's the first build you see when you come across the bridge. It's also the first thing I did back in November of 2020, if you can imagine back that far. So it's been around for quite a few years, and it was ginormous. When you looked next to the other adjacent farms, there were things like a wheat mill and an inn. And this farmhouse dwarfed them both. And so the sense of scale, even the fields are larger than I used to make. So I might even chop those down a little bit. Right now, what I did was I took off the second floor and I removed the about 40% of the footprint from the previous house. So like I said, it was really big. And I got it down to having like a kitchen and a main room on the main level and a single bedroom upstairs with some storage. And it feels fine now. Like I really prefer the look. I took a bunch of screenshots for before and after because I wanted to make sure that I maintained some of the details and textures in the roof, because I did really like the look of the build. It was more just the scale of it that was kind of off. It also had a covered work area like next to one of the chimneys where it was like covered from rain, and there'd be like a workbench and like barrels and different things in there. And I kept that because I liked the look of that. I just reduced it in size again because when I made the house smaller, I had to make the roofed section smaller to kind of lean up against the house. And in relation to the barn that's in the back, it's a lot nicer. I've also freed up a lot of space now at the top tier of the hill that the farm is on. So I had to add some garden and some crop rows and stuff up there. I haven't gotten into the landscaping yet. This is still very much a work in progress. But I have to say, when you're renovating an existing build and you already have a build palette, you already have textures, you've got the way that the roof looks, you've got block selections inside, it goes a lot smoother than you think. Like I was thinking like, oh gosh, this is going to take forever. In 2 streams, I got 80% of the way there on the house. I think the grounds will take a little bit longer, but that's just because working with landscaping and foliage is just kind of like a little bit more of a trial and error thing. Whereas this, I can 100% just kind of go in with a plan. And I have to say, 4 years of experience of building medieval houses, specifically medieval interiors in tight spaces over the last little while, really helped with getting the roof down to the way I wanted it, having the roof intersections the way that I wanted it, and then leaving myself enough space inside to not have to even move the staircase. Like there's little tricks that you can do to give yourself a little bit more access to space, using trapdoors inside as walls, using backward stairs inside to still give the same texture outside, but just remove that quarter block for headspace, and just even giving yourself like 2 blocks of space like asymmetrically rather than having to walk down a single block corridor makes things feel so much more open. So I was able to do all that, and the top 2 floors are now done, or the top 2 rooms in the top floor are done. And then I haven't done anything in the kitchen and the living room because that's going to be whatever I decide to do with the tables and chairs thing. But now we're on to the outside. We're going to be doing like the pathing work and changing the gardens and moving some stuff around. So I'm really looking forward to it. I'm also noticing some stuff that I just didn't do. There's huge fields of potatoes. In the screenshots, people might notice that my potato texture is a custom texture. And even then, it still feels kind of boring when there's that many in a row. And so what I want to do is work in maybe things like azalea bushes or other things, depending on how long this takes, maybe some of the new blocks we're going to be talking about later today, to get some variety into the gardens a little bit. Not that it's going to be overgrown, but just something to make it look a little bit less like a grid of certain things. And those are all, one, skills that I've acquired over the last 4 years. Also, blocks that have come out, textures that have come out in the last 4 years of Minecraft updates. So the farm was feeling a little bit on the old side. So I'm happy that it's coming along.
I think you've got more patience than I have when it comes to like renovating some of the older stuff. Like I'd be so tempted to leave it there, and with the size of the potato field, just have the fiction of, well, this potato farmer's clearly just rich enough to afford a really big house. Like clearly potatoes have been sustaining the local economy for a while, and this guy is king of the potato or something. But yeah, I think it totally makes sense if you've got something that just it was one of your earlier builds and you didn't know what scale you were working at that point, and now it seems out of proportion with the level of detail that you've gone through, like fine-tooth comb over the surrounding area of West Hill at this point. I think it does make a lot of sense that you decided to go back and revise something that felt out of place or out of keeping with the style of the area now. So yeah, despite the patience it takes and the I guess we've talked about it in previous shows, the urge to not go back and redo stuff that you've done previously. If this one feels like it's sticking out like a sore thumb, then you're going to feel happier at the end of the day for it, right?
Well, I think too, it's also painting the foreground before painting the background, right?
Yeah.
Like this is the
definitely.
first thing you see when you walk into West Hill. And now I've got this big stone bridge. There's the huge wall of West Hill. There's a couple of not clock towers, but bell towers. There's a bunch of features of the town that were basically blocked by this thing because it was just big enough as you were walking into the valley that you couldn't see around it. And now, I mean, it's still on a hillside. It still comes up in front of the town, but it doesn't dwarf it. It doesn't feel like it's blocking key features. You can still feel like there's a lot of busyness happening behind it. So it doesn't kind of steal the show, which is nice. And yeah, the scale thing is really the biggest issue because again, like I was working from an image that I got from ArtStation, and I did the thing that you normally do. You figure out, well, what is going to be roughly 1 block wide in this piece of art, and then kind of like extrapolate from there. But that ended up being bigger than player scale horizontally. And then vertically, I just kind of did whatever felt right as far as a player moving around. But that just meant that it was such a massive build. And it wasn't until later on in the city where I actually dialed back those expectations, because I thought like, well, crap, if I make houses and inns and castles in the city to scale with that farmhouse that I made, this place is going to be massive. Like I'm going to be here for years. Turns out I was still here for years, but it was
Yeah.
a little bit, I was able to pack more in. Like I feel like I was able to make the city look busier rather than 4 houses on a street. There's like 6 or 8, right? So that kind of stuff I think really helped my decision to go back. But yeah, I don't tend to rebuild things. There's lots of stuff on the server elsewhere that I could go back and rebuild, but I will never let myself because it's part of a history. Whereas I feel like this particular area I want it to have its own experience cohesively, as opposed to the server. I'm totally fine with old builds and the temporary permanent stuff we talked about last week, like all that kind of stuff. I think I'm more happy with that stuff on a server wide basis than I am with Westell. Westell is like my little egg, and I want to keep it like an experience unto itself.
Yeah, and I think it makes perfect sense coming back to it now that there are new blocks in the game too. Like, I imagine November 2020, I'm trying to think when certain updates came out, and I don't have a perfect, like, Rolodex of that in my head, but I'm imagining doing the interior now especially, like, you have candles and things to light stuff, and you were probably lighting stuff when you built this to accommodate mob spawns in light levels below 7 instead of below 0, like at 0. So like there's got to be some considerations that are totally different revisiting this build in 2025 Minecraft. Like it's a fun reminder of how far the game has come since then.
Yeah, there are 4 lanterns inside of the main floor. Totally not needed. There are, I want to say, even just the textures around the walls, and like there was no moss. I can tell you that much. So there's a lot of exposed dirt blocks. There's very little bushes. There was, if I remember correctly, I want to say the 116 Nether update happened either just before or just after I started Westell.
Right.
And granted, that focused a lot on Nether stuff. It wasn't a lot of useful stuff for the overworld. It was still big changes that started happening. But I think the Nether update kind of marked the current state of like big changes happening to Minecraft over the last few years. I think the Nether update was the first big swing, and then there are other swings like caves and cliffs and other stuff like that that also like followed suit. But yeah, it was around that time, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's come a long way, and I'm sure it'll continue to develop if you've got a little bit more stuff to do around the outside. So, looking forward to seeing how that one progresses.
What have you been up to in Minecraft this week?
I have done a bit more work on the landscape and the interior for my beekeeper's house. So Honey House needed some landscaping because it was built on this kind of, not quite a cliff, it's not quite big enough for that, but there is a rise of sorts where there's a dip in the landscape and this one section sort of jutted out, almost like Pride Rock or something. Like that, I felt I should build something on there, and that was where I ended up putting this revised honey and honey block farm. And so from there, I decided this needs a bit of landscaping. It needs something to make it look a bit more unique and have it stand out compared to all of the dirt and stone default terrain that was already there. So I'd done some landscaping. I swapped the stone and grass for tuff, moss, a bit of mossy cobblestone. The foundation of the house is stone brick, so there's kind of like a porch area that's made of stone brick. And where I've used tuff and mossy stone bricks, on one side I've got tuff, like natural tuff and mossy cobblestone underneath to try and keep them in a similar vein but sort of differentiate the color a little bit. That whole area is eventually going to be flooded with a sort of river valley that I plan on shaping out there. So for now, I've sort of made a little pond that should run into the rest of the area once I've started working on that. For now, it's just a great excuse to have some water there to break things up a little bit, to add in a different color, and to have a willow tree overhanging it made with mangrove leaves, and I think mangrove logs as well. It makes a really good like hanging texture if it's a vertical leaf texture. And so, yeah, I was working a little bit on that. I plan on doing more to the area to keep it in line with that and make that part of the geology of this area in general once I start terraforming some of the area around the mountain and the river valley and everything. Inside, I've gone with more of the modern farmhouse aesthetic prompted by the pale oak additions. So there are trapdoors for shutters on the outside, and I put the regular doors on the inside, almost like kind of repainted barn doors or something. So interior isn't anywhere near complete yet, but I'm just sort of boxing out the different areas of the inside, making individual rooms instead of it just being a big open space that's decorated. I decided to build walls made out of dark oak so there's a bit of contrast, and I started going into paintings and just little things that I could use to introduce a lot of detail into a small area. And it was through that I realized that there are a ton more paintings in the game that were added very recently. We've talked about them on the show a couple of times for certain, but they keep escaping my memory because I don't often do decorative interior right now. Most of the stuff I'm doing has been technical farms, exterior builds, and just filling out spaces or working on functionality that leads from place to place. The big gateway that I built in the Windy City project does not have an interior at all because it's not meant to be used that way. It's really meant to be like a monolith that marks the entrance to the town. And so now that I'm working on interiors, I go, oh, wait, like you sort of thinking, I've come back to this 5 years later and there's a whole bunch of additional blocks and stuff that have been added in the meantime. I'm thinking, wow, interior decorating has come along a long way because we've got decorated pots that I can put in here now. We have a ton more paintings. We have other little detail blocks here and there. There's more stuff you can put in flower pots than there ever was before. I think there's a bunch of diverse stuff has been added since then. And I've been using moss carpets, or pale moss carpets rather, on the outside, and those look really good up the kind of craggy faces of the stone. Like even just placing those against natural stone, you end up with something that looks like a crumbled rock texture where it's been eroded slightly by the elements. So lots of little details this week, nothing major in terms of progress, but like a decent sketch out of what I want more of this area to look like, and a start on the interior is what I've been doing.
Well, that's one of the best ways to start, I think, with landscaping is take a key feature, add the things that you want for the aesthetic that you want, and realize them to like 80 to 90% as you've done, and then be able to kind of bleed that out. Like just there's part planning, but then also kind of just leaning into like how things go. I really like the extension of the foundation of the build of the front porch going down into and onto the cliffside. It makes it feel like a much bigger build too. Like it feels like it has a giant basement. I'm not sure if it does, but it feels like it could have if you ever need one for maybe bee storage or something. But I also really like the hanging willow tree made with the mangrove bits, because that combined with your mossy cobble and tough use, like it's such a versatile combination, and it really gives that overgrown stuff is falling off the tree, that kind of green vibe that you get when you just back up a little bit. Like up close, you obviously see, everybody sees the textures that are there, and I feel like you've also snuck in some pale moss with some grass on top of it too. Yeah, like that trick is just so good for having things feel like they've been around for a while, and it really feels like you got a good starting point for this river system or brook system, and the different tributaries and the different ways that you're going to deal with water. I'm curious if because I can't see it in the screenshots, like is this one of the higher points around in terms of water? Because you often talk about water in Minecraft not flowing downhill, and I'm wondering if you're going to have to like dig deeper and deeper as you want the rivers to go farther and farther away from the pond.
Yeah, I think this is going to be one of the water springs in the area. The others being coming down from the mountain. On this cherry mountain, I have like a bunch of water that I've really enjoyed the look of since I picked out the world seed, because it flows from a mountain biome through a cherry grove biome, so the water changes color, and so it becomes a paler, like lighter blue, almost cyan kind of color halfway down, and it sort of looks like the sunlight is hitting it, and there's like a ray of sun that's like
nice,
brightening the water in that area before it turns back into the standard blue water that you get in plains biomes once it hits further down the slope. And so I'm planning on having those water streams form the start of the river, and then water gets added to it as it goes, because that's how big rivers are formed in the natural world, is that, you know, a lot of different water sources conjoin and they tributary together. And so that's the hope, is that I end up with something that feels a bit more geologically accurate. But we'll see how I can adapt that around the stuff I've already built, or the features of the terrain that I like enough not to change too heavily. But I think there's so much scope for interesting landscaping around that area. I really need to get back into the habit of custom trees, I've decided, now that I've done more of the willow tree stuff, because I think at bigger scale, obviously you have to plan your builds so that the scale is going to work with the trees, but I think some people do some fantastic tree work, and a lot of my trees, I think, are still stuck in the scale I had when I was building smaller houses. And I really want to get back into creative tests for some larger trees and creating branch networks before I add the leaves on, and making the trees look a little bit more realistic. So I think that's probably a goal for early this year, is to start sketching out trees in creative more and seeing how those will translate into, now that I'm building bigger in survival, can I build bigger custom trees as well?
I think scale there is the really important thing, because whenever I've tried custom trees that are smaller, usually the best I can do is just kind of tweaking an existing Minecraft tree. Like you grow one from a sapling and then just like change it a little bit, just kind of look like it has a bit of a player touch to it. But if you change it too much, they don't often work very well, because at that scale they kind of have to be little blobs. Or in the case of something like a spruce tree, they have to be like a specific kind of shape for it to be readable as a spruce tree, so it's not a blob. But when you get up into larger trees, I feel like it becomes a lot easier to add boughs or different space. I think the temptation with custom trees is to put too much in and not let enough light or space through. And we actually saw some cool custom trees this past weekend in our Minecraft Hangout.
We did, yeah. So, yeah, hoping to take a leaf out of their book, no pun intended. And we want to look more towards the natural world in Minecraft, because as we're going to get into the news here, the natural world in Minecraft is evolving quite rapidly these days. So, in an article published on January 29th over on Minecraft.net titled More Minecraft Game Drop Features, Mojang announced through this write-up a bunch of additional features that ended up being included in this week's Java Snapshot and Bedrock preview. We'll have a link to that article if you want the full write-up. We're going to go into the exact changes in the changelog for Minecraft Java Edition Snapshot 25W05A that was published that same day. So, big changes in 25W05A include cow variants that were teased last week. These are now determined by the biome that they spawn in. There's a temperate variant, which is the cow we are all familiar with, which spawns in any biomes which aren't covered by the upcoming lists. The cold variant is a variant that spawns in taiga, snowy taiga, old-growth pine taiga and spruce taiga, windswept hills, windswept gravelly hills, and windswept forest. The warm cow variant now spawns in savanna biomes, jungle biomes, and badlands biomes, including all of the variations on those like wooded badlands, savanna plateau, sparse jungle, etc. When bred by a player, a baby cow variant will not be chosen by the current biome, but instead randomly selected from one of the parents' variants. They've also added a bush block. The bush is a new type of decorative block that can be found in small patches in plains, windswept hills, windswept gravelly hills, windswept forests, rivers, frozen rivers, forests, birch forests, and old-growth birch forests. The bush can be composted, and using bone meal on a bush places a neighbouring bush next to the first bush if possible. They've also added the firefly bush block. The firefly bush is found in swamps and near rivers. When it is dark, glowing firefly particles appear around the firefly bush. Using bone meal on a firefly bush will spawn another firefly bush item similar to reproducing 2 high flowers, and the firefly bush currently emits light level 2. There are also new ambient block sounds for ambient sounds in desert and badlands biomes. Sand, red sand, and terracotta of any color have a chance of playing ambient sounds when surrounded by any one of those blocks on at least 3 sides up to 8 blocks away. The block sand idle sound effect can be played in any biome, while block sand wind only plays when these blocks occur in desert or badlands biomes. Dead bushes also have a chance of playing ambient sounds when placed on top of 2 blocks, which are any color of terracotta, sand, or red sand blocks in any biome. The look of the temperate cow has been slightly updated from the original model to have an extruded snout. Beacons and their beams now render beyond 16 chunks up to the client render distance. To keep them easily visible at longer distances, the beam is rendered thicker the further away you are, and it now renders up to 2048 blocks high, up from 1024. Technical changes in 25W05A. The datapack version is now 65, which brings support for the new cow variants and desert block ambient sounds, along with some tweaks to last week's functionality that allows items other than shields to be used to block damage. The resource pack version is now 50, which includes updated pick textures, new and updated cow textures and model, and textures for the new firefly bush and bush blocks. Fixed bugs of note in 25W05A. We just got a handful to read for you here, but there will be a few more on the changelog. The Eye of Ender hitbox was lagging behind the animation. That's been fixed, along with warm pigs not spawning in windswept savannas, shields no longer consuming durability when blocking attacks, and sprinting being cancelled upon flying with Elytra. This also brings a handful of bug fixes for game tests and a few other departments. For a full list, once again, check out the Minecraft.net changelog, linked in our show notes over at thespawnchunks.com.
Minecraft Bedrock Edition Preview 1.21.70.20 was published on January 30th, In addition to the new cow variants, bushes, and firefly bushes we just covered in the Java Snapshot, this preview adds leaf litter and wildflowers to the Bedrock Edition experimental features. For the full list of Bedrock changes, check out the Minecraft.net article, again linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
So naturally, we wanted to keep our main thoughts about the major additions for the main discussion this week, because we did that with the pigs, and it feels like a lot more stuff has been added in this one. I think I'll talk about desert ambience here, though, because it feels like a minor change in terms of overall features. It's a subtle background thing. I think it's a really cool addition. I have already advocated for more ambient sounds to be dictated by combinations of blocks and block placement after we got that from the pale hanging moss and pale oak blocks, and I think that's a really great combination and a fun thing to include as something players can move around into other biomes and use themselves. So I think that's really cool. I think the main thing I hope, and I haven't really played around with this snapshot as much this week, so I didn't go to a desert. I found the cows, I found the bushes, but I didn't go and seek out the ambient stuff and test that too much. My main hope is that it doesn't get overwhelming, because sand and terracotta are things that players often bring to other places, and so if the sound effect is really noticeable, then maybe it will become a distraction or not be what people want for that particular build, especially when it's terracotta of any color. So I built pretty heavily with terracotta in the build I was working on. My storage room, I have like green terracotta walls. There's definitely enough blocks of it around. It was just the fact that it had to be present on 3 sides of a block that's an interesting one. So if you're just building flat walls out of it, then any blocks that have a block immediately above, below, to the left, and to the right of them are going to be affected by that, and 4 of the 6 faces of that block are going to be covered, so they're going to produce the sounds. It's whether or not players can get around that by cutting off blocks at a certain point, or maybe our block choices have to be taking into consideration whether or not it's going to produce ambient sound as a result of building a wall out of sand or terracotta or something. So I need to play around a bit with this before I have a verdict on it, but I'm hoping it's subtle enough that it won't be too much of a distraction once you've built with those kind of materials.
I like the idea of giving ambient sound control to the players, like having it not just be something that happens in a biome. So like if you wanted to have that windy noise or that ambient noise, you'd have to build in a desert or in a badlands. I accidentally added hanging moss and pale oak leaves to the decoration inside my barn in the abandoned farmstead, and the barn creaks, which is awesome. I had forgot that was a feature. I didn't realize that was the combination that was going to do that, and it was fantastic. And now that I know that I can do that, I mean, like, doing it on purpose will happen more often, I'm sure. But that's a very specific combo. Like, there's not a lot of other cases where you're going to put hanging pale moss on pale oak leaves. And I feel like with the terracotta, as you mentioned, like there's a lot of other situations where that's going to come up. It's still cool to have. And if I haven't really heard the sounds, I've seen a couple people make videos on them, but it was pretty faint. It would be cool if that kind of like wind-swept desert noise was something that you could do on purpose in like the top of a tower. Put a couple of terracotta blocks together, make the tower out of terracotta, or like they mentioned, put like a dead bush on top of terracotta somewhere in the tower, so that when you are, let's say, 100 blocks above the ground, it feels like there's wind going by, or it has that feeling of being high, like the air is thinner, things sound different. And that's really cool. But I see your point about like, what if players want to just build walls in the ground with this stuff and not have it be something that creates this sound? So I'm wondering if there can be like a tighter combination. But the battle there, of course, is that you want it to happen organically in the world too. I like the dead bush idea. I think that's a very specific thing, and you're not going to necessarily see those dead bushes in the walls of people's builds. A lot of times I use dead bushes around my gardens and stuff for decoration, but very seldom am I putting them on terracotta. It's almost always they're on dirt or coarse dirt to kind of signify like a dead bush or dead crop or something like that, right? So I feel like having it be something that can occur in deserts and badlands like the dead bushes, but then are not so common in player builds, is probably the right balance to have.
Then again, thinking about it, how frequently the noise triggers is probably dictated by the sheer quantity of material that you find in a desert. Like if you think about the standard desert, the sand layers are probably 3 to 6 blocks thick. Before you dig down, you get sandstone. And obviously, mesa areas of Badlands biomes are huge deposits of terracotta. So I presume what they've done to balance it out based on how much players are going to be building with this stuff is the volume of it means that the sound effects probably occur very infrequently, so they have a lot more chance to trigger because of the sheer quantity of terracotta blocks in a Badlands versus the amount that a player is going to be building with. Even if you're building like a 2-block thick wall, you're probably not going to be using anywhere near... Think about the amount of terracotta that you strip out of a Badlands in order to build with the stuff, and you're barely making a dent, but then when you're building with it, it's enough to make an entire wall of some house or other. So yeah, I think maybe if they balanced it correctly, you won't get those ambient sounds nearly as frequently, and you're probably getting a similar amount of ambient sounds just from nearby dark caves and things like that. That's my hope, at least. Again, I need more experience with this before I can really judge this for myself, but I haven't heard people really saying, oh no, wow, this is going to absolutely mess up my terracotta builds, so hopefully they've got a good balance of it.
I thought the beacon beam changes were cool too. Something that I always thought was really strange when I was playing Minecraft, and something that kind of pulled you out of it a little bit was using a beacon in your home base for its benefits, but then also like it's a really good flag in the sand to be just like, oh, there's home base, go back that way. But if you're too far away, it doesn't render in. It also felt kind of strange, like it got thinner, and the idea that they render it thicker so you can see it from farther and it goes up to the full world height now, I think is changes that make sense, right?
Yeah, I was playing around with that in the snapshot once I'd found all of the other stuff, and I retreated far enough back that the fog around the outside was obscuring everything for probably several chunks at that point, and you could still see the beacon beam in the distance. I think where this is going to really make a difference for me is whenever I place a beacon in my survival world, it's typically in an area that I'm strip mining out for cobblestone and other resources, and so those always end up underground, and I always end up struggling to find my way back to those because the beacon beam doesn't render in when I enter the area. It renders in when you get much closer to it. And so I'm hoping what happens now is that the beacon beam renders as soon as the block is loaded, and it becomes much easier to find your way back to those strip mines if, say, you've gone to repair your tools at an XP farm and then you've come back to continue your dig, right? So I think that's what I'm hoping is going to be the case, and that'll make it a lot more easy to navigate, spend a lot less time looking for that 2-block deep hole in the ground or 2-block wide hole that you've dug down to your strip mine so that the beacon has sky access.
I'm thinking down the road in terms of like my sci-fi build and using beacons as decoration as much as I'm going to use them for like speed and other things around the build. And I think it's going to be really cool to now consider like the color of the beacons as we know you can change them, but then how far away that's visible could be really, really cool for centerpieces in certain builds.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff people can do with beacons that is just a little bit enhanced now that we've got a few changes to those. The other thing I wanted to highlight before we move on to email is there was one bug fix that was sprinting being cancelled when you fly with Elytra. It should have been taken care of by the reverted changes that we got in last week's snapshot. So I'm glad the community identified that was still broken, because that Elytra bunny hop is really part of my muscle memory. I find myself doing it even when I don't intend to, just because sometimes it saves you a firework or two if you're just gliding down from one place to another and you want to get into the... in my case, like I run back to my storage room for materials while I'm working on this landscape, and I find myself doing that all the time, and it just gets like a very jerky rhythm to it. I haven't trained myself out of that behavior yet, and it's a good thing to know that I don't need to, at least as far as the next release is concerned, because they haven't come up with a holistic solution that pleases everybody on this yet, so it looks like we're getting that bunny hop movement back in thanks to that bug fix.
Moving on into email, if you'd like to email the show, the address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Please keep your emails short and to the point. It does help us include it in the episode. First one is from Mycelium M. Pig Potential. Hey, Joel and Pix. When talking about the new pig designs in recent episodes, you mentioned a desire to update mob behavior and usefulness in addition to the mob design, and it got me thinking about the use of passive mobs as hostile mob deterrents. Currently, creepers are scared of cats, skeletons of wolves, and spiders of armadillos. This leaves zombies as the main hostile mobs without a counter, quote unquote, as it were. I wondered if pigs could perhaps step into this role. Pigs and boars will eat most anything in the real world, meaning rotten flesh probably isn't a concern for them, ? In Minecraft, zombies can also drop carrots and potatoes, the main foods for feeding and breeding pigs in the game. It also creates a funny inversion of the piglin behavior in the Nether, where piglins are afraid of their zombified counterparts. Curious to hear your thoughts on this, and if not pigs, what other animal, already existing or a new introduction, do you think could be given this quality? Big fan of the show. It's definitely helped me get back into Minecraft over the past few months. Mycelium M was slain by zombies because he forgot to bring his trusty sentry pig with him.
I genuinely really like this idea purely for the justification that pigs scare zombies because the zombies drop carrots and potatoes, and also the inversion of piglins being scared of zombified piglins. Like, I love the idea of a zoglin coming through a nether portal, which is incredibly rare because hoglins run away from them typically, but when a player forces a hoglin into the overworld via nether portal, you get the zoglin, and then the zoglin seeing a pig probably 1/8 of its size and just going, ah, and then just running. Like, I love that idea. I think the humble pig getting a hero moment like that is something that I would absolutely love in Minecraft.
Pigs are just so, I mean, they are passive by design in the game, but like they're also so slow that they feel even more passive than passive mobs. Like, they really just kind of look at you like, have snacks?
Yeah.
And then they walk away. You're right. Mm-hmm. And it's like, and this would be even funnier if they got like excited about zombies. Like, I know you have snacks. You know, like, I think it would be really amusing. I also enjoy that pigs are probably the slowest animal as far as mobs go, and having them also scare away the slowest hostile mob. Like, the zombies are by far, baby zombies aside, zombies are definitely the slowest. And I feel like it would be a really good deterrent, like early game, to for new players especially. Baby zombies really tripped me up when I first started playing, and to have a pig stand there, and baby zombies move in such a very strange, like, herky jerky fashion. Like, they kind of run full tilt and then stop, and then they run full tilt, whatever they do. And I just like the idea of a baby zombie running up to you, except for then it sees your pig at the last minute and stops and kind of stares for a minute, and then like 180s and just runs the other way. And it would be very useful, I think, for new players to figure out, I guess, that pigs deter zombies. And I think it would be a real interesting way to deal with them if you like riding through the night on your trusty pig with a wolf companion galloping alongside of you. Well, galloping may be the wrong word. But then if you had the ability on the pig to have some sort of like saddlebag with a cat in it, like the only thing you need to bring is a bow for the spiders. Unless the pack also allows you to have an armadillo on the other side. But it would be this like merry band, almost like the D&D stuff we were talking about in the pre-show. Like this merry band of adventurers, you and your animal companions, that are basically like this giant hearth bubble of like, you can't touch me bad guys, as you go through, you know, the wilderness at the speed of sand because you're on the back of a pig. Like, you're not going very fast. It would be very, very funny.
Yeah, I think having an armadillo on your head and then the wolf and the cat sort of teleport to you, probably, because I think it still works when you're riding an animal that the other animals can teleport to you. It's not like flying with Elytra where you're not touching the ground. Yeah, like I think that's a pretty funny image. Yeah, I mostly worry that pigs and zombies are both common enough that this interaction would be too frequent, whereas like cats and wolves, you have to be fairly specific about taming them before they can be relied upon to scare away creepers and skeletons. Like, typically you have to tame them so they sit in one place. And then obviously pigs, you can't have them sit, so you'd have to like leash them to a fence post. You could probably do the same with armadillos now, but armadillos only occur in a couple of biomes, and so there's still a bit more exploration required for that. But I guess maybe the commonality of the pig versus the commonality of the zombie, you could have a bit more leniency with that because they're both everywhere. The interaction, you know, would occur very quickly, and you'd notice it quite quickly, but it would certainly be a good reason to keep pigs around. I'm now also, like you, imagining every player's base having a pig, an armadillo, a cat, and a wolf all leashed outside the doorway, and it's like the standard collection of animals for anything that swings by. I looked into mob sorting mechanics a while ago. I've done that a couple of times in the survival guide, and the typical approach for zombies was actually not to scare them away from something, but to lure them towards something. Most of the time in mob sorters, you put a skeleton on one side a wolf on one side that scares the skeletons in a specific direction. You put a villager on the same side, and that lures the zombies towards the villager. And then that ends up, with the zombies going down a trapdoor, and the skeletons running away and going down another trapdoor. Spiders have a unique hitbox because they're only a block high, so you could typically channel them into a water stream and have them drop into a different place. And then, there's a couple of other things. Witches, I think, are the only thing that isn't scared of or drawn to anything, but they're also much less frequent. So if you wanted to filter out witches, you do it in a different way. And then creepers obviously have cats, but I wonder if witches being scared of something could also be a fun mechanic, because anytime I encounter a witch in standard gameplay when I'm not in my Minecraft survival guide world, if I'm doing Minecraft bingo or something, a witch is probably the encounter I want the least, because the poison effect is brutal when you don't have armor or a great supply of food and nothing really to easily get rid of the poison effect with.
I remember when I was working on my first world, the one that I shared with Steven ESC, and digging into some caves and expanding my storage for the first time as I started to get a lot more, I guess, robust in my production in Minecraft, and I was running into witches spawning in the caves, and I hated them. They were so hard to deal with. As someone that still isn't very good at PvE in Minecraft, I really did not enjoy it, because at the time, I think I barely had iron armor. I didn't have an iron farm. It was only what I had found, and dying was a problem because you didn't know how much stuff you're going to get back and all that kind of stuff. And I wonder what would be a good natural enemy for witches. To answer my CLM's questions about what other animals might you think of, I think it would be really funny to have a cute animal freak out a witch, like a bunny, like a rabbit. I think that would be kind of funny for a witch to be just I'm going to come after all you except for the cute one. That's terrifying.
Yeah, I think
why did you bring that?
Rabbit's feet being lucky as well,
yeah.
That could have witchcraft connotations, but it could also be the witches are bad luck and the rabbits are good luck, right? You could have some sort of juxtaposition there that makes logical sense for a video game.
The other one that I was thinking of, which is more for comedic value, is ghasts being scared of bees. Balloon, needle.
I'm imagining a bee going after a ghast, and it's the same thing as the pig versus Zoglin. It's like David and Goliath, this kind of matchup, just buzzing up to. I think the main problem with that is just that ghasts target you from so far away that it would be so difficult to be bee, go, and have it flight up really slowly. But I do love the idea of a bee bursting a ghast. I think that's hilarious. That's so funny.
It could also just be a different behavior in bees. Maybe ghasts aren't afraid of them, but maybe bees just hate them with a passion. And you get to see a bee fly at Mach 4, just fastest you've ever seen a bee in Minecraft. It just folds its wings back. It just does a Top Gun move and just goes in kamikaze style. That would be hilarious.
Amazing. I need that now. If not in the game, then some sort of Minecraft animator has to put that to the small screen at some stage, because that sounds hilarious. Yeah, I'm always interested in these interactions. I'm interested in the ecosystem of Minecraft and how the different mobs interact and stuff. So while I think pigs and zombies are still probably too common for this to be a thing, I would love to see new implementations of mobs. Maybe the zombies get scared of something else, some other kind of creature that we don't know yet. Maybe the copper golem or something like that even keeps them away, sort of patrols to make sure that the zombies won't get into your base or something. I like that as a defensive option. Our next email comes in from Dan B with the subject of temporary becoming permanent. Hi Pix and Joel, I have a temporary build in my base that is becoming permanent due to an unexpected benefit. When I first brought armadillos home, I put them in a little pen, intending to build them a little burrow habitat later. However, I found myself more and more delaying that habitat. When the armadillos move around, they now activate a previously placed calibrated skulk sensor tuned to walking, which activates a command block that kills all bats in the area. I added the command block because bats were spawning annoyingly often in the underground portions of my base. I've found it so beneficial that whenever I do get around to building the armadillos a habitat, I'll probably leave some behind to continue to activate the skulk sensor. Thanks for reading. Dan skipped off into the distance, trailing armadillos behind him on leads, activating skulk sensors as we go along.
I think this is really fun. I know that not everyone uses command blocks in the game. We do on the Citadel, just for teleporting to the different build zones. But I think it's a really cool way to use Minecraft to deal with an undesirable behavior in the game, like the frequent spawning of bats. I make a joke out of it sometimes in my streams because very often, twice now in wheat fields, I've had bats show up just because luck of the draw, there's a nearby cave. And I guess there's just a one block or a corner block gap where the bats can kind of like either spawn or kind of like squeak through, pardon the pun, and then end up flying around on the surface, which is weird because like there's no cave entrance anywhere. I'm not sure where they've come from. And we just call them wheat bats as just like a funny in joke. But the thing that I have on the Citadel, which annoys me, is the frequency of the rain. And even though I'm admin and I can very easily just type, the weather clear command and get it to stop raining, I've often thought about either writing a data pack or creating something in the game where the player would have to do something, like sacrifice something or cast a spell or do something to stop the rain, or to keep it sunny for a longer period of time or whatever that happens to be. And I like the idea of using mob like mechanics like wandering armadillos, or I've seen chickens used in switches before where you give a chicken a small space if you want a random redstone signal, then every time the chicken paths over the pressure plate you get a signal. And I think it's a really neat way to pin like the outcome of something on a random animal behavior. And I don't know it's a good example of like the temporary permanent, but also I feel like you've sort of stumbled upon like a whole new thing in your world where like you could just take this to all kinds of different levels depending on what things are happening in the game that you either like or don't like. You've created some fun and created some learning opportunities as well, which I think is really, really cool.
Yeah, I personally, I love the idea of armadillos now being the scourge of bats as well as spiders. I think it's kind of fun that they've got multiple things that they can mess with in your world, especially after the previous email about having armadillos scare the spiders away. And yeah, I think it's neat to have the game like allow these happy accidents like this. And it sounds like you set up the command block especially just to avoid there being too many bats just kind of hanging around whilst you're exploring caves, or I think in some cases even if you're excavating an area with something like a TNT cannon, when people make those large kind of tunnel bore contraptions, having mobs around can really mess with that. If the TNT hits something in midair or something gets too close to a contraption, and like, hostile mobs are obviously more of a concern in that case. Having a creeper blow it up could be disastrous, but having the mobs otherwise interfere with movement of stuff down there can be a hazard, and otherwise it can just be irritating. In the case of like bats providing that level of ambience, sometimes it's something you don't need. So I think it's really fun that you've come up with your own solution to it, and that the armadillos have now become again, as we were discussing with the previous discussion, a temporary permanent solution to that. I think that's very apt for the armadillo.
I wouldn't be surprised if this is implemented in other places in the world as Dan builds and expands. Have your armadillo bat dispenser, like as part of like, where am I going to put that in the build? Just like you need to place your furnace, you need to place your crafting table, but where does the armadillo bat killer go? It's cool.
Your idea for a rain switch as well reminds me of I don't know if it's a superstition or if it's actually just a behavioral thing, but we have this thing in the UK of like, you know it's going to rain because you see cows in a field lying down or something like that. I'm not sure if that's the case everywhere, or how real it is, but imagining having a skulk sensor somewhere around where like if a cow turns up and walks over it, then that means it's going to rain, or that like resets the rain cycle or something. I think that'd be pretty funny. Having the ambience and the environment of your world a little bit more under your control, but shaped by the random interactions of animals is a fun concept. Speaking of cows, though, let's move on to our main discussion, which is Mojang making moves. Pun definitely intended this time around. It's the first time I'd come up with the title for the show before we even started recording. But 1.21.5, the as yet unnamed game drop, is shaping up now to be an ambience update. We've had a few additions in the form of these new pigs and a few bug fixes and bits and pieces coming through, but now in this most recent snapshot we have cow variants and bushes and firefly bushes to add into the mix. I wrote down a couple of general thoughts on this. And I think at this stage, this is proof that these minor updates are a really great place to expand the natural world of Minecraft in a way players might find underwhelming in a major update. I feel like a few of these changes often like squeak through in major updates in the past, and they're just like tacked on to the end as if there's nowhere for them to go. And players have for a while said that they want an ambience update. They want something that's going to add more sound effects, more life, more diversity, more plants, more flowers, that kind of thing. And so often the response, or at least the generally understood community knowledge about this, is that you can't really sell that as a cool, fun new update, especially for newer players joining the game, because a lot of those features seem more mundane or commonplace, or the kind of things that feel too minor for something being a major holistic update. And if you look at stuff like Trails and Tales, being a recent example, that update felt like, looking back at it, it could have been very easily split into smaller updates like we're getting now in these minor update snapshots. And I'm hoping it means that major updates are going to return to being big thematic additions like we saw with Update Aquatic, the Nether update. Village and Pillage had a lot of focus on that ecosystem, and obviously Caves and Cliffs with terrain. The thematic link between features in the Trails and Tales update was not necessarily about the game, it was much more about the player, which felt a little bit more tenuous, I think, for some people, especially people who've been jonesing for an update to the end and things like that. So I'm curious if we're going to see stuff like the Trails and Tales update would have been, but split up along all of these minor updates, and through these little minor tweaks is how we get hold of the ambience update people have been wanting for a long time.
Yeah, that to me makes sense. You know, like I think the bigger swings for the major updates, and then these other more temperate updates for the drops, I think makes a lot of sense. And it's still cool to have them though. Like I don't think that having the, you know, slightly less exciting updates in the drops deters from the drops. Like I think it's cool to have these changes happening more often. I mean, I think only a few months into this new cycle of updates, it's been more exciting for us as a podcast to cover. Like I remember when, even in this year, we had the first Snapshot come out, and we had it sooner than we thought we were going to get it, you know, because again, the updates that are coming along with it are not as complex as something as like another update or you know, Caves and Cliffs and the larger swings that Mojang has made over the last few years. So I'm all for it. I think that the constantly updating, I don't want to say quality of life, because this is more than that. It's new content, but it feels like new content catching up, if that makes sense. It's like the kind of things that players have been asking for a while, but is really hard to package, as you said, in something marketable and shiny.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's not the kind of thing where players are going to look at it and be like, wow, but they're like, yeah, no, that makes sense. Like it almost feels like logical additions to the game rather than something that's meant to be a centerpiece that catches everybody's attention. So let's go through the stuff that got added. Specifically, we're looking at cow variants, bushes, and then firefly bushes. We'll start with the cow variants because we did get a bit of discussion in about these on last week's episode, but they were just teasers. We hadn't seen the full textures yet. We also, I don't think, had seen the changes to the cow model. So how do you feel about all of that, Joel?
I mean, they're fine. I like that they updated the model. That was something that I was talking about before. I feel like they could have updated it farther, but that's just a personal preference. I like that there's the different textures and the different colors for the cows is cool. I feel like more could have been maybe done for the cold variant to have it look maybe a little bit more like a Highland cow, but I feel like they're also in between a rock and a hard place where you've got real world versions of cows and you don't necessarily want it to be a Highland cow or a certain kind of beef cattle or a specific dairy cow. Like, even though the coloring on the normal cow that we've had in the game for a while looks like a dairy cow, it's not specifically named that in game. It's just a cow. And I think by keeping them a little bit more generic, they kind of keep them from being, I guess, keeps the players' expectations down from what they are going to be like compared to the real life version of that animal. I like the warm weather cows the most, I think, in terms of my favorite. I think it's just because the horns give a really cool silhouette. I do enjoy the fact that the baby versions of the new cows have the same size horns as the adults. It
Mm-hmm.
does make them look really cute. It does also make me wish that you could keep the baby cows. Like they all eventually grow up, right? And it would be just like crops, where we want to freeze the growth of crops for decorative reasons. It would be
Yeah.
neat to be able to keep a baby cow a baby for a while.
You can like wax this cow. It's like
Hey, right?
the
Like, I don't know.
implication at this point where wax is
Yeah.
like the universal freeze this in place kind of item. Yeah.
Yeah. But then like I said, I like the other texture as well. Like I think that it creates a cool variation. I'm glad that they updated the model, although I'm a little bit sad they didn't go a little bit farther than that. Like for me, and I can't recall where I saw this comment. I think it might have been in my Twitch chat, but somebody said like it would be really cool if we could have some sort of ambient animation of the cow like eating grass and then lifting its head up.
Yeah.
But in order to do that, you need a neck, and the cows don't have necks. Like the head is just stuck right on the body. So there would have to be a diversion from the current Minecraft. We can almost call it a trope of what like cows and sheep look like in the game. Pigs as well, I guess. Although pigs are a little bit more true to what they look like in real life, in terms of like the head and the neck not being all that separate from the body. But with cows, the cows have a long neck in real life, and I feel like if they had done a little bit more there, then it could have been something that could added more life to the experience of being around cows. But like it's fine. Like I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm just saying like it's updated textures to the current cow.
Yeah. I think sheep don't have a neck strictly either. I think maybe their body is larger, and that's why it would look kind of weirder for a cow's head to move that way. Because I think sheep have like the bulkier kind of thing for the wool. But even then, like sheep eat the grass all the time now, and for them it's a wool replenishment thing. But then it's not exclusive to that. It doesn't always change the grass to dirt when horses do it, for example. So I think, again, there's precedent for this stuff already. It's just about whether or not they want to imply that there is behavior connected to that, or if it just makes sense for all grazing animals to be able to do this, of which cows are definitely one. Like you, I think the models are fine. I'm happy to see them making subtle changes beyond just a reskin, the snout, the horns. I like that each different breed has different horns as well. I think that's quite nice. The existing cows remain with the little stubby ones, while the Highland cows go forward, and then the warm cows ones go out. I like these more than the pigs, but mostly just because I like a Highland cow. Like they're some of my favorite animals to see just on Instagram. The big floppy fringe always just makes me smile. I think it was interesting as well that the mushroom model did not change in the process of this. And obviously cue all of the Reddit posts and YouTube videos about how Mojang forgot the mushroom. I'm curious if they did that intentionally, if they didn't want to update the mushroom because they consider it a divergent species or something completely different. Obviously, the argument against that is that you can shear a mushroom to remove the mushrooms and it turns back into a regular cow, at which point the snout would somehow extrude from it, which would be kind of disturbing. But I do wonder if they're planning on doing some other stuff with mushrooms, considering that the Moo Bloom was posed as a variant in the past and has been voted on and not added to the game because it didn't win the mob vote at Minecraft Live. So maybe there is still room for those to be tinkered with a little bit, and for the Moo Bloom to be almost like an official variant of the mushroom, despite them probably not being found in the same places. I'm interested to see if they do more with this, if the mushroom was simply an oversight because they aren't considered lumped in with these other cows, or what. I presume now also if you shear a mushroom, it still just becomes the temperate variant of cow. But that would be an interesting, like, randomized thing to have a mushroom potentially be either a warm cow or a cold cow in addition to the temperate cow, and you could almost make that a game of, like, which one are you going to get? Place bets, That'd be a fun way of doing it. But yeah, I don't have much to say about the cow variants that I wouldn't have already said about, like, the pig variants. I think it's nice that we have biodiversity. I think the textures are cute. I'll probably never want to kill one of the Highland cows because I like them a lot. But yeah, I don't know if it's a huge leap for me in terms of gameplay. I think it's just nice to have them as something to collect if you're somebody who likes to collect all of the different types of mobs in the game, make a zoo or something like that.
Yeah. I know it's probably true of the game because it's just a mechanic, but I'm assuming you can milk all the different versions of the cows. And I know that cows produce milk across the board in real life, but like dairy cows are used for that specifically. Whereas like we don't have beef cows at beef farms being milked for milk production. Like they're sure for raising the offspring, yes, but like it's not part of how we use them in agriculture. So like I don't I don't know about like the different ways that people will use the cows in game. I like the idea of the Moo Bloom being a variant of the mushroom, and I don't know exactly what would be the best mechanic for that. Like, do you bring the mushroom to a specific biome, like bring it to a flower forest and then shear it, and then you get the Moo Bloom as opposed to a regular cow? That would be interesting. And if they update the textures, like if they give the mushroom a snout, I'd like them to add some depth to the mushroom textures on its back, similar to how the horns are shaped on the new cows. I think it would be cool for the mushrooms to not be like that crisscross of polygon textures. It would be cool if it was actually like a modeled mushroom, similar to the way that the mushrooms from the nether biomes, like the crimson mushrooms and the warped mushrooms are. I think that would be a cool way to do that.
Speaking of things that are that crisscross texture, how do you feel about bushes so far?
I mean, they're fine. It's cool to have a variant to the vegetation. More options is good. I need more space in my inventory. I can tell you that. So having yet another thing to carry around when I'm doing landscaping is going to be interesting. I find them a lot more useful color-wise than sweet berries. Sweet berries look good in taiga biomes, but they tend to clash with a lot of other biomes. And I feel like this is going to go with, well, one, I think it changes with the biome color. So it seems to like go with grass no matter where you go. So I think that's going to be great. It certainly helps fill in more space. Like when I'm using things like ferns and too tall ferns to fill in space, the single high fern doesn't really fill in a lot of area. It seems like more of its standalone plant, whereas this fills in more of the block space and feels a little bit more dense. And I think that one of the ways that you can help your grassy areas feel more dense is going to be to combine this with grass and this bush block, and which is going to be better than just having grass everywhere, because that tends to get really repetitive. And I'm not saying like big fields, but like maybe you've got like a path and it's only 6 or 8 blocks, but 6 or 8 blocks of just the grass block repeated over and over again is going to feel very grid-like, even though they are kind of offset. And I'm assuming it also works the same way that a grass block does, in that it doesn't happen in the exact center of the block. It happens in like a off center, depending on the block space. I'm not sold on the way it's reproduced with bone meal. Like I want to place it where I want to place it. I should be able to just bone meal it and get it over and over again, which happens when it doesn't have anywhere to go, or it's used up the 4 spaces that it will spread to. Then you just start to get the item over and over again. But why that isn't the first way it drops, I don't know, because the other stuff does that. And I think that could be changed, because I don't necessarily see this as something that I want to spread around by using bone meal. I just want more of them so I can place them where I want them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that there's inconsistent behavior between the bush and the firefly bush. I think they are intended to be like different species of plant, and so for now it sort of makes sense, but this is the only plant that behaves this way that isn't like glow lichen or something like that you're reproducing by bone mealing it and it grows in the cardinal directions. I think this is closer to the behavior that you get from the smaller flowers in Bedrock Edition when you bone meal them. So maybe it's them trying this out for Java Edition players as well, where this is going to be much more commonplace behavior to spread plants on Bedrock. I kind of agree. I think they're fine. I think they're good, mostly because they add diversity to the world through a more opaque texture than something like short grass, where it has a lot of strands, but obviously there is, empty space between the blades of grass. They also have a shorter hitbox than short grass, which sort of feels like the opposite way round to me. Now that we've got both of these, it sort of feels like to be a bush, it should be a little taller, and then the short grass should be something closer to like the nether sprouts that you get in what are they called, warped forest biomes in the nether, the little blue kind of version of grass there. And I do think putting them together with shortgrass, ferns, azalea, small drip leaf even, there's a growing palette of aesthetic plants that aren't specifically flowers, that don't really have any other kind of effect. They're another tool in the natural landscape kit, and I think that's great, but I can't help but feel more could be done with them. And that's probably a frustrating position to take when what they're trying to add is just small things, like just little things that don't have to have too much grand purpose behind them, right? Similar to the cow variants, they don't add more functionality, they're just there for aesthetics and ambience. But I just feel like they're missing something, ultimately. And I think maybe it's because we've had azaleas first, and azaleas, I think the model I absolutely love. The fact that it's got the trunk of the azalea shrub in there, and then it's a full block. Obviously has the collision of a block as well, but I think you can do more with the X-shape block model than you can with something that has to occupy the space of a full block in terms of the shape of it, right? Like the X-shaped kind of prop bush, like the stage flats kind of version of it. I think you can shape out the top parts of it to be more kind of bumpy and curvy, whereas if you've got something that's a full block, it's very difficult to make it look like it's textured and shaped, but not give it the full block hitbox so that it feels unrealistic to walk on. And so that's a difficult line for them to walk. And I think maybe it's the lack of branches compared to something like azalea. They feel more like heathland plants, like heather or gorse, or something that grows as like a low ground cover, than something I would consider a bush. So maybe it's just that the name feels inconsistent with what I would expect from a bush. I think they're going to be fun to work with if they get added to the game in their current state, but I can't help but wonder if maybe some variants, maybe based on like block position or something, would go a long way to make them feel a lot more diverse than they already are.
As you were speaking, I was thinking about variations. One could be similar to ferns, hit it with bone meal and turn it into something that's taller than grass, right? Maybe it's only 1.5 blocks instead of 2 blocks, like something that makes it look more like what you were describing as a bush. And then what we get here, like you said, is more like ground cover. Mm-hmm. Or you could be something that the more that you place in a block, similar to candles or pink petals or the new leaf litter, like maybe if you put 3 of them into a single space, it gets more dense or larger, right? And then if you break that, then you get 1 or 3 or whatever back. I want to point out, you don't need shears to pick this up. If you punch grass, you get nothing or seeds. If you punch this, you get the bush back, which I think is great. Because again, if I'm dealing with them, then that's one less thing in my inventory that I have to have, which is a set of shears to deal with it. Now, I still have to have the shears to deal with ferns and grass, so I'll have to have them. But if I'm just messing around with some bushes, it's nice that like if I place it in a wrong spot, I don't have to like switch and find the shears in my inventory and then kind of go around that. It seems like such a small thing to complain about, but when you do it over and over and over again, as you're landscaping a large area, it really starts to add up. You start to feel like you're flicking your inventory open like every 3 seconds. Mm-hmm. And being able to punch it and just have it drop, I think is good.
Yeah, there's such an odd diversity of things that need different ways of obtaining them. Like the sweet berries, you punch it and you get berries, but then you use the berries to plant the bush, the same you do with glowberries. And then you're shearing grass and ferns, but then you're just punching some of the other stuff like flowers. And yeah, it can get like sort of a little tool heavy if you're working with all of those different things. Not to mention, needing a hoe to properly obtain moss blocks so that you're, doing that as swiftly as possible if you need a lot of them. There's a lot going on with the natural world in general. It's like fine-tuned landscape gardening throughout all of it. And in addition to that, now we have firefly bushes to add into the mix. I think personally these are a solid addition to visual ambience. I think the purpose of them primarily is to create these clouds of firefly particles, and I think individually as plants, I like them. I think they seem like an interesting, almost close to what we used to see in the partially grown wheat texture. It doesn't quite match up with wheat now, but it's like 90% of the way there. And so I think they'd mix in quite well with crop fields, and especially if the crop fields had like this notion that there's pollen floating up around it. Like you could do a lot with the firefly bush that doesn't have to just be fireflies with this implementation. And I also like that they are based on light level, but not day or night time. The snapshot changelog was sort of ambivalent about it. It was sort of unclear about whether the whole effect was based on it being nighttime specifically, or whether it was just dark. And you can put them in a cave and still have them appear during the day. You can put them underneath a solid block floor on the surface in the overworld, and the particles appear during the day. They obviously don't have as much impact if you're looking at a bright sky behind them as they would at night. But I think it's really nice that you have that level of control over them. So these, I think, are the one thing implementation-wise that I'm really happy with.
I think they look great. Like, I think the particle in the atmosphere is fantastic. I mean, there's a little part of me that wanted a firefly the size of a beach ball, but hey, you can't. We've got the bees. The bees are big. It just would be very funny to see like a giant light bulb flying around in Minecraft. But I like the control. Like, I like the fact that you can move it underground, that you can put it underneath blocks. Like, you could have a magical corridor with these firefly particles going around, which it could just be sparkles of magic for all your, imagination is concerned. And then just hide the firefly bushes underneath the floor. And the more that you have, the denser the particle cloud will be,
yes.
Or the more widespread it will be, depending on like how you place them underground. Like, do you have 4 in the corners? Do you have 4 all together? Like, there's all kinds of really cool stuff. And I think it's a really cool way to implement that. I was hanging around in friend of the show Fwip's stream on the weekend, and he mentioned, and I think this is something that he picked up from Jersey Boy, that the firefly bush itself is a lot more useful when the firefly flickering light texture is not on the bush itself, but just the particle effect.
Right.
Because then you've got another bush with a different color that's, like you said, halfway between wheat and grass, and kind of has a lot more variety and versatility. But if you want to put it in your garden, or if you want to put it somewhere, it's going to have these little flickering lights on it. And if you don't want that, you can remove it with the texture pack. But it would be nice if that was just kind of how it was. Or something that Fwip pointed out would be, if, even though the fireflies are sensitive to light levels and not daytime and nighttime, have the firefly bush only show the particles on the bush texture at night, as opposed to all day long. And just because that way it would be pretty cool to see during the day, but at nighttime it's like, well, there's going to be particles around anyway, so you might as well just have them on the bush. And I thought that would be a cool way to do it. And if it did that, it would also be a neat way to clock day and nighttime underground too, if they only came out at night.
Yeah, I agree. I think if it was maybe like a block state change or something, again, you can trigger that with an observer. You can do all kinds of like bits and pieces. But I think what we have from fireflies now, compared to what we were initially told in the Wild update, which was like a 2-pixel mob that kind of floated around in clouds and was food for frogs at that time and everything like that. I think what we have now, stripped away from this entanglement with frogs, what's left is a very simple and elegant block, like easy to manipulate and works intuitively. You add more of them in the area, you get more particles. And I think it's something that in the long term is going to be much more satisfying to players. I think when they were initially pitched as a frog food, I envisioned there being clouds of them as a mob floating around in swamps that would get eaten by frogs before the player even knew they were there. And I think with this, what you get instead is something that the player has a lot more control over. You don't run into issues with interaction because it stems from a block, not from some sort of nebulous cloud where you're not certain where the hitbox is, or something that's difficult to click on because it's tiny. I think overall, a much better implementation than the idea that we were shown as part of the Wild update that was then sort of rolled back. And I think that's the best case scenario for everybody in this case, really, because these don't feel like they fall short of expectations of being able to move them. People are talking about, could we collect the firefly in a jar and use it as a light source or release them elsewhere? And this circumvents all of that by, the block itself is a light source. It's a very slim amount of light that it gives off, but it does give off some light. So in theory, you could use that in slime farms, because those currently rely on the single block light given off by brown mushrooms if you're building them in a swamp, and that prevents all mob spawns aside from slimes in swamp biomes. So you can just dot firefly bushes every other block and get the same effect now. It also means that players can move them around, but you don't have to worry about the firefly in a bottle thing, and Mojang doesn't have to solve the problem of, like, whether they give the player that interaction and the player becomes disappointed that they can't place bottles in the world, and they don't have to implement an entire placeable bottle mechanic just to appease that side of the player base. It gives everybody all of the options that they wanted, but with like a single solution, instead of a bunch of different stuff having to pile onto the scope of the original idea.
Yeah. It also drops when you punch it. You don't need shears for it either. So it works just like the other bush, probably to keep it in line with this new bush, because we don't have any of these things in the game yet. So having two bushes act the same does make sense. Although when you bone meal it, it just drops itself as an item. It doesn't spread like the other bush does. It does make me want other things like this. I don't exactly know what the implementation would be, but it would be cool to take like the particle effects from a crimson biome in the nether or a warped biome in the nether and bring it into the overworld, or bring it into the end, or whatever update they make in the end eventually. If they can take some sort of block from there or a combination of blocks from there, like we've got with the ambient sounds with the Badlands and the deserts, like if we could move a couple of blocks together in the overworld on purpose and have them affect like particles or something like that, I think it would have to be not a typical building block. Like you'd have to be something very specific. But it would be very cool to have that kind of control. And magic in the game has been, always around. And I feel like doing something where you could have magical particles appear and perhaps even control the color of them would be really interesting. I even just would like to have something like the ability to move the ash effect from a basalt delta and have that be like in a factory in the overworld, or if you're building a furnace or something and you want to have a lot of like, just have it feel like a dirty environment. That kind of stuff is really cool. And I don't know how to implement it in the game, but I feel like there's opportunity to do that because we've got a couple of other things now. We've got the firefly bush, spore blossom. We've got falling leaves are coming to every tree, but the pale oak falling leaves was one of the first. I feel like there's something else that I'm forgetting about particles. Anything else come to mind?
Nothing comes to mind right now, but I like you. I think I am forgetting a couple of them. Like there are frequently more and more these days in updates. There are controllable ambience features that are coming through.
Which I love.
Yeah, and I think there's little like particle effects and things like campfire smoke and stuff that have obviously come through in previous updates to that. But I think all of those are so crucial to what the Mojang team has been mentioning since even the introduction of the Allay and the mob vote options that year were all about adding life and movement to bases where they feel like the world feels like it's too static. And I think this is a great addition to that and a great like thought down that road. Is something I think would be great to get some listener feedback on as well. So obviously we'd love to hear your thoughts on some of the new stuff that's popped up in this snapshot this week, but if you have any ideas for how more particles could be introduced to the game, especially now that fireflies are ticked off that list, which I know is a wish list feature for a lot of people after their like redaction from the wild update, it'll be really interesting to see what else people have in mind for ambient features that they'd like out there in the world. For now, though, I think that's where we'll leave it for this episode of The Spawn Chunks. Thank you so much for listening, folks. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can visit patreon.com/thespawnchunks to join our community. Pledging at any level will get you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat, but a quick reminder that our Patreon pledge levels are going to be adjusted in the next week or so. So if you feel like holding off until that's changed, that's fine. We will be making some adjustments and we'll be keeping our patrons in the loop every step of the way. So you will know as soon as we know. Either way, that gets you invites to our Discord. You can listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every Monday. You can participate in monthly hangouts. The latest one of those should be up in the Patreon RSS feed very soon. We currently have 299 patrons, so we'd love to tick back over the 300 mark. Obviously, it's also Patreon processing week, so we're keeping that in mind when we talk about these numbers. We want to give special thanks to our content engineer patrons. That's Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you all for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. It's free. Just poke a friend in the arm and say, hey, you should listen to The Spawn Chunks. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on all of your favorite social media platforms, and as well on YouTube, where you can get the show on Mondays, sometimes on Tuesdays, but Mondays for the audio version is available on all of your favorite podcasting apps, and then the video version follows that shortly after. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is found on our website, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Jonny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/Pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, where I do behind-the-scenes work for my YouTube series and play a couple of other games here and there. I'm also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. And aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on both Blue Sky and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Links to everything that I'm doing online can be found at joelduggan.com. That includes the Citadel Cafe, my podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. You can follow me on social media at Joel Duggan. I'm very easy to find. And Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I stream Tuesday through Saturday, mostly Minecraft and Satisfactory, but lately I've been playing a lot of Core Keeper as well, which is kind of like a mix of Minecraft and Terraria all together with a little top-down RPG action. So it's a lot of fun. Pixel art as well. So check it out.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, or so we've heard.